Welcome to the Going Green podcast with COP27 still going on. And today we're going to have a look at the world economics of climate change that seems to be coming out in COP. But what we see in COP very much at the moment is what one hand giveth, the other hand taketh away.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate things in relation to all these things. So, a very good one about this is Egypt, the hosts of COP27. They are basically buying in coal and then selling their gas imports to, as effectively as gas exports because they know they can sell it to Europe, who is gas poor at the moment, who are desperately trying to buy gas. And so they can basically make a quick turnaround and they can basically, have a huge investment because, of course, Europe's buying the gas at a high price and coal is cheap. So they get their electricity for themselves cheap and they power their own economies for get going. So that's economically great for the country. But unfortunately, once again, they've just gone straight for the fossil fuels as opposed to taking the money and asking and trying to develop nice, clean, green ones. However, the critical point in all this is a country's got to have some money to spend on green. So it might be almost seen as they're trying to sell their gas for a quick buck. They might be trying to basically get a lot of money in to then do some green subsidies, as in solar panels or wind turbines, all sorts of things, and then they can have less coal or
In the
import
long run, yeah.
in the long run. So it's one of those things where economically they're doing a small short term gain because, of course, that's what's happening in the hopes that they can not prevent, but they can change for the long term better.
Yeah, but that's not also the case with somewhere like India, is it? India has, well, just before they went to COP, they made a little announcement, didn't they?
Yes. So India announced it was going to increase its coal imports or its coal production to approximately 1 billion tons of coal a year. And that was mostly for burning to power their economy. Yeah. And it's one of those hard things to say that they're doing this and then they go to COP26 and pledge to cut more CO2 emissions. And so one of the things they talk about in COP is, we're going to reach peak CO2 emissions by 2030 and then we'll do the reduction.
But unfortunately, we need to be doing the reduction now. And what's the chance of keeping 1.5 alive? And the answer is pretty low at the moment, I think. Yeah, we're looking at something like sort of between little hope and no hope, I think, really, with trying to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And what does that basically mean? Well, you only got to look at 2022. Major floods in Pakistan.
Then followed by, of course, major droughts pretty much all over the world.
Wildfires nearly everywhere. And sort of cool. Yeah, it's not, I can't isolate just one place. Even the UK was suffering its not first wildfires, but it's really its first wildfires that were engulfing and taking out a village.
Yeah, it was more the urban parts of the
Yeah.
wildfires. And so now to counteract all this, currently at the COP, they're trying to talk about all climate money. With the UK's pledge to triple its climate investment. Lots of money is coming to smaller countries. We know that Austria has given away lots of money to help countries affected by climate change survive. and that's fine. That's not wrong, and they need this money to cope with their things. But it's one of those things where you know there is only a limit to how much more money we can put in to deal with uh, the escalation of climate change, all the problems of the climate change, before we realize that it's actually cheaper to invest in preventative measures than actually reactive measures. And so far, no one's come to that grasp because, of course, let's say you prevent climate change, or let's say you build a dam to prevent a flood, and then, of course, you know, you don't calculate how much money is saved by the fact that you're not having to deal with the flooding each year because you'll then it's moved on to somewhere else, and there's another, and that's the problem with all this finance is you're not seeing the money, and people don't believe the money, would have been saved because, of course, it was never spent. It's this contradiction of sort of money not being spent or not being or being saved, but they're not actually spending it, so therefore that's how they're saving, which is one of the major problems of climate finance.
But we're also looking at basically the use of solar technology, solar panels. They've gradually got cheaper over the years, and so therefore there's more money. So in theory, you could invest more money on more new technology and improve the system. So we get what we call a typical S curve in development. It's a slow start, then it accelerates. And then, as nearly everyone has this, it slows right down. We saw this with mobile phones, with TVs, all sorts of new technology comes in. Yet with solar panels, we're not quite seeing the investment that is needed to try and keep and drive this forward. We've got so far, and people saying, "Oh yeah, we've done really well so far." Give themselves a pat on the back and say, "Right, okay, well, we could spend that money on," and off they go.
Yeah, it's hard to say with or the of part of solar panel because, of course, yes, they're working, but there's two parts of the solar panel product. There's obviously making solar panels more efficient, and then there's a manufacturer of solar panels. So two costs are well melded in together. And so what we're seeing is, yes, the manufacturer of the solar panels have dropped down,
Price, yeah, they're a lot cheaper.
a lot cheaper. They think that's a good price. But of course, they're only, say, at maximum over 30% efficient in converting that um, of light into electricity. And so there isn't this money into development of increasing that efficiency because why have super efficient ones when we can just churn out non efficient ones? Because we still haven't worked out a better way or a better manufacturing method of the solar photovoltaic cells, these
Yeah.
silicon crystals.
I've got, for instance, my roof. It's got probably the maximum number of solar panels we can actually put on the roof. I also have a problem that I've also got solar thermal on my roof. Now, the solar thermal works really well, but although the solar thermal works, it only really works from probably March till October, making suitable sort of hot water. Now we're in a November time, it's not doing as well. The sun is getting lower in the sky and it's up for a short amount of time. So my solar panels aren't generating enough electricity all the time. They can, by mid December, we're only generating sort of for about 6 hours a day. Whereas in June, July, we can make sort of nearer 18 hours a day. And this is where I need more efficient solar panels,
Or
but there
more,
aren't any.
yeah, or more importantly, solar panels only make sense in certain latitudes because one of the things is the further you go north on a latitude, of course, the less hours of daylight you get. Whereas
Or south, to be quite fair.
or south, and the more you get to the equator, the more equal. Yeah, and it's one of those things where there could be a push to put lots of solar panels on the equator, and that will generate more electricity it makes more economic sense to put the solar panels there. But the problem is, of course, that's where the lack of finances or is. You know, this is where all the developing countries generally lie, as opposed to the developed ones, which are more in the north and the south. Yeah, the towards the poles. You know, it just happens to be those sorts of things. And so, why there isn't this incentive is because, well, the UK isn't in the equator. You know, we've got to deal with the environment we live in, and so it doesn't make economic sense for us to do so. And so you might say, right, what does it make economic sense for people on the equator? And the answer is it should, except of course they don't have the ability to pay for these incentives like feed-in tariffs or green subsidies, all these sorts of things.
Well, there's still 10% of the world in 2022 still doesn't actually have electricity. And that's also a rather sobering thought. And where are those people that don't get electricity? Oddly, they're more near the equator. It's an interesting problem, which is why the UK, because we don't have a high amount of solar, invest heavily in wind power. And we've got these large offshore wind farms, and our government is still sort of deciding about the onshore wind farms. We sort of stopped those,
Yeah,
and then we're going to start them again, and now who knows?
who knows? Well, in relation to all that, let's just take, say, the Netherlands, famous for its windmills and has the more wind farms per capita, but that's just because it's the smaller country, therefore you can get away with these huge numbers. And yet it still burns approximately or generates power from I think it was like 37% of its power is still generated by coal.
Yeah, because the UK converted from coal when our coal industries sort of collapsed with the various strikes. They then turned to gas, a cleaner fossil fuel, but still a fossil fuel. A few years ago, because we did that, we made the investment then, which means we do have coal reserves, but we can't use them. And so we're dependent on gas that now, well, we don't largely have because our North Sea gas reserves are dwindling. So we've got to do something else. And this is where we need to invest in new technology.
And the major unfortunate problem is that it does take a lot of money to make or invest into new technology, which is one of those lacking things of saying, sort of, for every penny at the pound investment, you say, you might only get a trickle of new projects, new incentives to do so, because there is no, not incentive, but it does take a long time. It does take a while to generate these new clean ideas. It's like there's a whole new battery production being invested in, trialed, and that's made from urine. Uh, and they're doing all these things by all the events of the Portaloos, and basically that's how they're trialing it. But of course, the trial is taking 5 years, and then once the trial's done, that's when, after the 5 years, we'll be then starting looking at the economics of doing this as from battery. And of course, that's
5 years,
5-10 years
years
down the
line.
line.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we need it now. Yeah, we need all this innovation, these things not to have happening, but we need it to have happened so that these innovations and the new technology could be introduced now. It's not there. And so one of the things is people lack of is saying, finance is expensive, or investing in these things is expensive, because of course it is a long-term problem. It is a long-term investment, and that we've got real problems right now. There is no long term if we go extinct in the short term. So
Yeah.
it is finding this balance, and unfortunately, the scales are tipped so much towards now or the short term rather than even the medium or even the long term. They're everybody's sort of not putting it off, but they're saying, "But I've got problems now. I've got problems here. I've got there. Things I need to solve." As opposed to a nice climate thing, which is sort of let's push it, let's invest now, so that later down the line we're cleaner.
Yeah, that's the problem at COP. Well, there is some good news. The US climate bill that's hopefully going through with our friends in the USA might now mean it's a good time for lots of the USA, which in fact are further south than the UK, so they can significantly benefit by going solar. So, might this be a really good time for them to do that? Well, we can only hope, really, that you know, with this change in um, policy, I suppose that the USA's got, that maybe it could be a good time to go solar. But well, we've got to decide really whether that is. Uh, the Americans are seeing, like the rest of the world, the cost of their electricity soaring, uh, and so could it be that investing in electricity generation by sort of
The,
this other
the
means could be well worth it?
Well, this
It should be.
yeah, this is the point, that in theory, that if they go through, they can, that they're being hammered by all the problems we are, that they should be, that the solar panels are actually economically viable, because of course gas prices are high, and therefore money's going down with inflation. Therefore solar panels would produce, I say, energy, but it's energy that you've never produced, if that makes any sense. So it's always new, and suddenly you do a lot of it. Suddenly you've got this energy source, and then you can reduce things.
But one of those things is the solar payback time. You've got to spend quite a lot of money to get your solar panels, and it's going to take time to recover that. Now, of course, if electricity prices are going up, then in fact that can sort of help. You might get a surcharge for your electricity generation. Now, you might make some of your own electricity like we do, and we can sort of put it into the, perhaps surcharge is not the right word, put it into the grid and help other people when you're making too much electricity and not using it all. And you can get a payback on that. The problem is that there are all sorts of special tariffs. There are sort of uh, interesting things like inflation, hacking at these various things. So if you have to buy your solar panels, great. But if you have to sort of borrow the money, then you're having to pay back interest that could be dramatically increasing. So it's still difficult, but there are sort of good ideas on solar panel investment. Basically, we're seeing in this country, we bought our solar panels, we paid for them, and we're now starting to sort of just about start getting a sort of a payback
Yeah, I'm
period.
not saying the reap the reward. That's the not.
It's not quite that, but we're nearly
It's
there.
like the difference between cress and sort of wheat. Just the scale of it all. But it is one of those things where, if the economics were made viable as opposed to are viable, then suddenly things could be looked. And then people, problem is, people say, "But where is that money coming from?" And there are no good answers here. You got to say, well, yes, it's money up front, and then yes, a loan, and that's a problem there. But could there be a different loan scheme, sort of, that is on a very cheap system, and it's inflation busting in relation to, it's not fixed by normal banks?
Well,
But
in the UK, some of these companies will buy the solar panels and they will fit them for you. So you've got no upfront. upfront costs. And you then benefit by cheaper electricity bills. Sounds great. What do the other companies make on it? Well, basically, they make all the extra bits and pieces. So, yeah, if there is a feed-in tariff, they basically take that. Uh, they're doing it. So it must be economically worthwhile for them doing it, because you do pay them so much money for having your electricity, but you're still quids in. So that can help. Uh, but at the moment, I'm seeing I've got a gas boiler that's starting to get old, and I'm thinking, yeah, I may need to replace this. And I've got a choice. If I replace it soon, I can actually replace it with another gas boiler. But do
Yeah.
I want to? Would it be better to go for air source heating and do it via electricity? Now, of course, you're not using any electricity for the heat. You're only using the electricity for the pump. So it's a lot cheaper to run. However,
And additionally on that, before the however,
yeah,
of course, although these machines are expensive, we've the UK say is currently doing a scheme to they put halves in, you see, on these heat pumps, so they are economically competitive with the gas boilers. So that's the more the choice when we are able to now make the choice of do we go for a gas one or a heat pump, because of course the heat pump cost is being made viable with the boiler. So yeah, just throwing that one in as well as saying there are things and schemes around
yeah.
trying to drive not change, but yeah, but
And hopefully the US will have the same.
yeah, if the US had a scheme like that, suddenly you would see the number of heat pumps go way up, because of course it is that investment. But if someone's putting halves in to make it competitive, and then you say, well, this has got more benefits than this one, you could suddenly see everything go that way. So the idea that these things are you know expensive can be relieved. But as I said, the major problem with heat pumps is they don't work well at heating quickly, in regards to the fact that sort of they can up the temperature every 1 degree every like something down for like 7 hours or something like that. It's
I
something.
don't know what the numbers are, because that's what my however was. I will have to change all my radiators. Instead of having, I won't say small radiators, but smallish radiators in my lounge, my kitchen, my dining room, which are basically quite hot, I'd have to have bigger radiators that are cooler to provide the same amount of heat. And this is still really a problem that we face with all of this. Can we sort of make these changes?
And the problem with all that, of course, is here in the UK, that's changing all the radiators over. That's a huge investment. That's ripping up basically the whole household plumbing and putting new plumbing in. It's not quite like that, but it essentially is very similar,
It's
and
expensive.
it's expensive. And so, you know, is that worth it? But and then it's on top of that, sort of going, well, you know,
But it's back to the same problem with COP. It is, do we invest in this thing now for the future, or do we just try and get our own house in order, and sort of, do I try and organize myself so I'm I'm happy for now, thank you, and I'm doing financially better, rather than investing in the future and trying to set up things that I will be better off in the long run. And if we don't do the long run, one of my little problems is not that, I'm going to have sort of electricity problems, but I may well have a beachfront outside my house in the next 50 years if we don't do this. And by the way, I live 100 miles from the sea. Yet, if you look at some new projections on maps, then the little town where we live could well become
A
the
seas-
seaside
a
resort.
seaside resort. Yes, it was. It was quite fascinating, that little picture, but that's a different story and a half. But the problem is that you've lost all these places which were making not money, but but that's but basically to losing them, and basically those people who are living there got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, but the time to invest basically has got to be now. We've got to get down to doing something, and we've got to not, if necessarily, keep 1.5 alive, but we can get rid of sort of perhaps 2.5 and go for could we go for 1.6? We're
Well,
talking about 1.7 actually,
yeah,
aren't we?
that's what I'm saying. They're trying to lock it down to 1.7, saying they've been, the get aim is 1.5. We might hit 1.7, and but it's whether or not we actually sort of keep it at 1.7. Do we just creep up to 1.8? And the answer is,
And we're
yeah,
seeing the devastation on 1.5. Well, we haven't even got to 1.5 at the moment. We're on about 1.3
uh,
temperature rise
something.
before
I
since
think it's 1.2, but it's
something
1.2
something
something that is closer
since
to three.
before the sort of growth of industry around the world. We've got to try and do something. And basically, if we're going to try and do something, we've got to do it now. And governments aren't interested. There are people trying to do things and trying to raise awareness. We have a group in the UK, sort of Stop Oil. Is it Stop Oil?
Well, they are a group.
A group. And they think it's good to glue themselves to various things. Um, Does that work? It raises a little bit of awareness that they're a damn nuisance. Does it sort of make me want to invest and do something else? I don't think it does. That's got to come really from governments. And if you can persuade the governments to say you have to do something, like we have in the UK, we've got no more petrol cars after a certain date. All right, they will allow petrol hybrids. But then I've still got a problem that will I have enough money to buy an electric car? I can't afford a brand new one. I'd like a Tesla. I'm open to offers, but yeah, I quite happily try driving one and test one for a few years. But basically, will I have enough money to buy one? No. I will only be able to afford one when it comes down to being a second-hand, nth-hand car. And then will I still be able to afford the batteries for it? Big problems, really, with this idea of short-term sort of security, what we're doing for the short term to try to keep us going, like Egypt's trying to do, like India's trying to do, like China's trying to do, rather than trying to sort of say, we've got to do something. This is our last chance to try and keep 1.5 alive. And I think we've thrown it away.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where the likelihood of all things going through in the next, it's now 4 years, because it's now the COP's gone through. We'll get back and basically said we missed it, we bungled it. Everybody,
Oh, it doesn't matter.
doesn't
But
matter.
don't worry. My home's not flooded because I live on a hill.
Yes,
Yeah. What are we going to do? I don't know. I wish I could come up with some good answers here. I can do my thing. I can hope that you can do your thing. Can you go out and can you invest? Can you persuade your friends, your neighbors to try and go green? And if you can, and if you could pass the word, maybe without all these governments, without all these cops, maybe the people could actually do something. But they can only do that, really, if their governments are prepared to help. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at what's going on in the rest of COP27. Hopefully, we might get some good decisions from this. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Until then, thank you for listening, and it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.